good day, folks. Welcome back to another lesson of Pirkei Avos live with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from Beitar Lit in Israel. And it's such a joy to have him share this class with us, the ethics of the fathers. This is something that I firmly hold that every B'nai Noach needs to actually tune their ears to, because this is what the Hebrew people teach their children, and it's the cornerstone of a lot of ethics that they pass on from their oral tradition. So it's such an honor to have someone like Rabbi Chaim Coffman share with us. We had to wait until it was after Shabbat in Israel, and we know that some of you B'nai Noach still don't tune in or touch your computer on Shabbat. But with my new schedule, this is just really the only time I could make it work with Rabbi Coffman. Very busy schedule. He's got so many classes going on Sunday, and during the week, I'm going to be tied up during the day. So I prize every moment with him, and especially when he's sharing Torah with us. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. Good day, Rabbi Coffman. So glad to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, as always. And, no one's got anything better to do because everyone's in lockdown. So, why not listen to some good Torah? Well, hopefully it's good. Ethics of our Father is always good. Always jam-packed. I hope we don't disappoint. Don't disappoint this week. We are in the first chapter, 9th Mishnah. Mishnah tells us, speaking about Dayanim, speaking about rabbinic court judges, spoke last week, right, about them and how they're not supposed to, favor one over the other, etc. So again, there's another thing here about rabbinic court judges. Shimon ben Shetach says, interrogate the witnesses extensively. Be cautious with your words, lest they learn to lie. Now, we'll have to see what the second part there means, but interrogating witnesses, right? One explanation is judges ask all kinds of questions, and there are ways and specific things that they ask in order to see if the litigants are going to contradict themselves, right? That's what they want to see. They want to see, obviously someone is lying, right? Someone, or white lie, gray lie, black lie, whatever you want to call it. Somebody is definitely lying right over here. So they want to make sure, and they're going to grill each person, and they're going to try and make heads or tails, of what's going on, right? And obviously the only way to get to the truth, right, is you take the witnesses and you grill them, right? Normally, I think I mentioned last week in a rabbinical court, normally the person who has the claim, right, he'll speak first with the other person not saying anything. Then the defendant will be able to defend themselves. And then the rabbis will start asking questions, right? They'll start asking questions where, whatever, different things, right? Different things to see who's in the right. They'll bring witnesses if they need witnesses, etc. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin tells us you got to ask the witnesses 7 different ways, right? There are 7 different types of questions that you ask. You're going to ask them where it took place, right? The place where it happened. Was it dark? Was it light? You're going to see if they're, what the other witnesses are going to say. Why? Because we're looking for what we call Eidei Zomimim. They are witnesses. They're false witnesses. And you have witnesses that'll say, potentially, they'll say, how could it be? You say you were over there, right? You're in Saskatchewan. But they say, what do you mean? You were with us in Quebec. How can it be? Right? So now, some people could, God forbid, hire witnesses, right? They could pay off witnesses to lie. And what happens if they're found out to be false witnesses? If there was a temple that existed in Jerusalem, they get the death penalty. They would get the death penalty, right? Because they get what they were going to give, the fact that they were lying, and they want to get, this person, to get nailed and to pay and whatever. So whatever's going to be that person's supposed to get, they get, right? And they can certainly get the death penalty, no question, right? No question about that. Now,
but it's
relevant. An interesting thing. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, but it's relevant to what the falsity, if they were hoping to inflict something that incurred the death penalty, then the death penalty would fall. But if they were going
Yeah.
to inflict something that was a monetary loss, that could be judged against
No,
them, right?
they would, yeah.
It's level.
Yeah, yeah, it's a pretty severe thing. Certainly, lying is always bad. But if someone's paying you to lie, you're gonna say, well, what did they do? Well, they caused the other person damage, right? So they, measure for measure, they should have to pay, or a much more serious thing, right? So that would be the thing. They're gonna say, well, you say you were here, but you were with us, right? That's an impossibility. It can't be, two places at once. So there's no limit to the questions they can ask. You might think, well, maybe the judges are limited to what they can ask, but there's no limit. They can ask what color was the clothing, does the guy have a patch on his eye, what color was his hair, right? They want to make sure that if they're gonna, convict somebody or obligate somebody, that they have the right information. If the person says, well, I'm not really sure, it was dark at night, I couldn't really see so clear, but this is what I saw. Okay, but if that person at that time wasn't wearing those clothing, then it's not him. Right? Obviously it's not him. So they're gonna ask all kinds of questions, about the time, what they wore, where they were, etc. So they're gonna make sure there's no stone unturned, until they get the information that they need. Because obviously what they're looking for is someone to slip, right? They're looking for, a contradiction. Now, there is a little bit of leeway, because if a person says, let's say it was on Sunday, or was I going to say better, it's like on Wednesday, but really it was on Monday, right? If it's one day apart, it could be they'll still accept the testimony. One day apart, a person can make a mistake. 2 days apart, person's not necessarily going to make a mistake. Especially, let's say, a person goes by the Jewish calendar. So there are times when the calendar will have an extra day, right? An extra day in the month. So therefore, a person can make a mistake, right? Instead of being the last day, it was the second to last day. But they didn't realize, that month has an extra day. So there is a little bit of leeway where someone can actually make a mistake, and the rabbi's going to accept what they say, because there's certain things they may not remember, right? They certainly may not remember. So if it's within certain parameters, whatever it may be, good. So there's not going to be an issue, right? There won't be an issue. The rabbis will let it go. If it's something, 2 days later, 3 days later, a week later, a person's not going to make such a mistake. A day here, a day there, an hour earlier, an hour later. Okay, some things are going to be absolutely crucial, right? That even they may still throw it out. But, that there are certain things that within a certain time frame, they're going to let it go. Because a person could make a mistake. They're not going to remember, every exact detail. But if they're close, and around the same time, give or take, but they're not going to make such an egregious mistake, then it could be that it'll be accepted. Right? So that's really the first part of the Mishnah, to understand that they can check them out as much as they need to. They can ask as many questions as they want, right? And they're going to try and find out, right, who's contradicting themselves, who's lying, in order to see what's going on. Yeah, question.
Yeah, Rabbi. I mean, especially for those here in the West, the B'nai Noach that have come out of Christianity, the concept remained about casting the first stone. And from my understanding, that what you're discussing right here, if the death penalty was to be instituted, when somebody was casting the first stone, it was usually those that brought it to the court. You guys had a tight system, right? So if somebody was making an accusation, they would actually have to be the one that cast the first stone. But they were putting themselves under the scrutiny of the rabbis to get to the bottom of the matter. And if he's found guilty, he would be the one stoned. So there's a real detriment. I mean, I just hope that helps those that are out there that might be coming out of Christianity, that would understand that this is a deeply rooted concept of order and justice.
But there's a good reason. There's a good reason for that. Let's say had two witnesses warn somebody about the laws of Shabbos, right? They say, listen, if you smoke right now, it's a Torah prohibition of lighting a fire. So now let's say they get the category right. They have to get the category right. And they have two witnesses that warn a person on Shabbos. Right? Two Jews, let's say better, two Jews, right? Let's make clear. Two Jews you're warning. And you say, if you do this, you're liable for a death penalty. But they get everything right. Right? They get the category right. They get, the specific thing right. And the person says, I don't care. They say, I don't care. And they light up the match, have a nice smoke. What do the witnesses do? They take him to Sanhedrin. Right? They take him to Sanhedrin. They'll tell the Sanhedrin, this is what happened. We witnessed it together. So what are they going to do? So all things being equal, guy's guilty. Fry him. Right? You kill him. But who's going to kill him first? Who's got the ability to throw the stone first? It's the witnesses that came. Now you're going to say, why? Why should it be them? I mean, okay, they can do it. They can be part of it, right? The whole big party. Let's stone him, right? The whole big party. We'll throw everything at him, until he dies. Well, not the way it works. They normally went to a 3-story building and they would push him from his, from his loins, so to speak. Make sure that he's probably going to fall on his head and he'll die. And if that doesn't work, they take a big stone. They take a big stone and aim for his heart. That, you know what they say, if the left one doesn't get you, the right one will. Now you say, that's what stoning is? Yeah, it's pretty severe. That's the most severe of all, of all corporal punishment. So why don't they make him the third person do it? Fourth person, whatever the case is. Why do they have to be the first person to do it? Because my Rebbe says they're the ones that saw the transgression. If they're the ones that saw the transgression, it makes an imprint on them. Even though they say, I would never desecrate Shabbos, right? I would never do this. But when they see somebody, right? They see a Jew desecrate Shabbos, you can't do this today, right? Even the time of the temple was very rare. Anyone got killed. But in general, you see, you see someone mowing their lawn. He's a Jew. It should make you cringe inside. You're not going to stone him. You're not going to say, Shabbos, Shabbos. You're not going to scream at him. You're not going to do anything. Right? So good. You want to befriend them. You want to try and bring them closer. Okay, but one thing a person has to do is that they have to scream out to themselves and say to themselves, what a terrible thing this is. What a horrible thing this is. This guy doesn't know anything about Torah. He's desecrating Shabbos. We're not talking about where someone holds by a stringency or a leniency, whatever. This person desecrates Shabbos, period. Even if he doesn't know anything. What should a person be doing? He should be screaming inside. What a desecration of God's name. This person doesn't know anything about Torah. Look what he's doing. He's mowing his lawn. Right? So that's how we have to be. Because otherwise, my Rebbe says, if you see something like that, and it doesn't affect you, it means it's light in your eyes. Right? That means Shabbos observance is light in your eyes. Now, not everyone agrees. My Rebbe number of times, has made protests, peaceful protests, here in Jerusalem to show against the desecration of Shabbos. Right? Now, people will ask, and they say, well, that's what we do. Not all the rabbis agree. You should do that, so to speak. It's not going to do anything anyway. Right? So, many people will hold they're not going to change. It's not even the point, because I asked my Rebbe this once also. If they're not going to change, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm not going to get upstairs after 120 years, and God's going to say, my holy city, this was going on, and no one said anything. Everyone just went about their business. Now, the other side is going to say, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? If I say something, if I make a protest or not, these people aren't going to change. But the answer is, my Rebbe would say, it doesn't matter. The fact that these things go on and nobody says boo when you're in the palace of the king, this is 10 times worse than Corona. Yeah. Right? If you make an example, you make a same-sex parade. And somebody asked my Rebbe this one after he gave class. He said, they're going to make this parade. It's going to go right by our yeshiva where we learn. So he says, what should we do? He goes, I don't think you should be there handing out Tootsie Rolls. I don't think you should be giving out ice cream. He said you should be out there learning. Right? Showing that what they're doing is wrong. Non-provocation. There's no provocation, but you have to show it's wrong. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, you're doing it in God's backyard. Some of the commentaries say, why Sodom of all places had to get destroyed, right? So the Torah says they were very, very evil, and there were a lot of things they did wrong, a lot of things that they did wrong. But the question was, okay, does that mean the whole place, had to be wiped out? Some people say, okay, drop a bomb, put up pavement, put up a McDonald's, we'll call it even, right? So why'd they get wiped out? Okay, what they did was terribly bad, no question, right? But some of the commentaries say, where was it? It's in God's backyard. When it's in God's backyard, these are things you don't mess with. You want to do it anywhere else, it's also bad, right? We're not whitewashing it. We're not going to say, go do it in Saskatchewan. Who cares? Nobody lives there anyway, right? So we'll do it there. Is it any worse? Yeah, it's still bad. It's still forbidden. But you do it in the palace of the king, right? You do it in the palace of the king. My Rabbi said about this, this whole virus and everything else. Said, yeah, we got to take precautions, right? We certainly, have to take precautions, no question. He said, but at the same time, his mantra is, look at all the desecration of Shabbos. Look at all these things that go on. That the irony of all irony, just to digress a second, is that today, on Shabbos itself in Israel, there are no buses. No buses in Tel Aviv. No buses in Haifa, right? These evil people in the government say, yeah, we'll give them free buses to go to the beach, to go here, to go there, because we're going to show Shabbos doesn't mean anything, right? God forbid. So what happens now? Now I get this major scare. So they're in lockdown mode. You're like, I can even speak to you through Zoom. I might cough. You might get it, right? But in the end, everything's shut down. No discotheques on Shabbos in Tel Aviv. No restaurants open. No malls. Everybody had to be home. Okay, I'm not saying people weren't necessarily outside or going or driving around or who knows what, but essentially everything is shut down. Kind of ironic. One little microbe is enough to shut down even the most staunch people that'll say, we have a right. We have a right to do what we want. They'll call it kfiyat datit, which means religious coercion. Who are they to tell us? We can have free buses on Shabbos, imagine. Not just they're going to run buses. They're going to have free buses. Crazy. And you got, ultra-Orthodox Jews in the government, and they got their hand in this. They're not doing it. Right? But my Rebbe will say, they still have a hand in it. They're doing it under their nose, and they know it. So you're going to say, how could they be part of a government like this? Well, it's very simple. Because if you weren't part of a government, you didn't vote, it would be 10 times worse. True. But at the end of the day, you still have a hand in it. Right? So here, everything's shut down. And everybody's, whatever they're going to do on Shabbos, but they can't go anywhere. They're stuck at home. So it's ironic. Okay, the whole world in lockdown. Good. Right? But the fact that one microbe shuts down these stupid idiots that, say we can do this and we can do that, we can do the other thing, and it doesn't matter. And they do it in God's backyard. Well, guess what? You're also shut down now. You also can't go anywhere. Now, is that the reason for the virus? I'm not saying that's the reason for the virus. Right? Synagogues are shut down. A lot of them. Not all of them. Right? But when you see somebody, the point is, I don't want to get into the virus because everyone and their mother is speaking about it, right? But the idea is when you see, as a Jew, you see someone desecrate Shabbos and you see they don't care. It doesn't matter what they know, right? 90% of all Jews don't know anything. Doesn't matter what they know. They'll say, it's how I relax. It's not what the Torah meant. It's Webster's 8th definition, right? All these different things. Doesn't matter. But if you see them mow their lawn and go in their car, you can wish them good Shabbos. Fine. May not do anything, but at least they see you're not attacking them. Right? All right, 1 second. So the idea being that when you see something like that, inside you should scream to high heaven. Because you're never going to be the same because you don't see the direct punishment. That's the idea. In other words, what should happen? They desecrate Shabbos. Boom! Right? They should get zapped. But why don't they? They don't for one very simple reason, because we have free will. Right? Even though God knows what we're going to do anyway, we still have free will. We have the ability to act. So if we have the ability to act, doesn't matter. Right? But a person cannot get, that cannot be a normal thing. They can't be normalized to see, oh, this is what people do, right? And whatever. Because, if a person lives, in a religious area and there are, secular Jews there, most places in the world are going to be like that, right? Nonetheless, your soul gets desensitized, right? That's the idea. When your soul gets desensitized, you say, okay, so, someone will say, what do you care what they do? Right? But the whole point is it affects you. You don't see how it affects you, right? But it makes your soul weaker in a certain way unless you understand what it is, right? And unless you're screaming in your mind, what a horrible thing. It's so bad. Desecration of God's name. Not to mention desecration of Shabbat. All these things. That's what a person should feel. And you can never be caught off guard. That's what the evil inclination wants, right? But you have to be strong. So people say, well, that's not the way to protest. Okay. Maybe the vast majority of rabbinical authorities will say that's the case. That maybe it's not going to do anything anyway. It's a waste of time. You should be learning. Could be. Right? But the other side will say, if you're in the palace of the king, I'm not saying it's bad in other places, but if you're in the palace of the king and you desecrate Shabbos and you allow these type of parades, you don't think there's going to be payback? That's the danger. That's the real danger. Again, I'm not downplaying this virus by any stretch. But, when you look at something like that, who knows what the repercussions could be? Yeah, question.
Yeah, I got a couple of, but a quick point, is that not what you're saying? I mean, clear in Ezekiel, that you need to warn it when it's wrong and you see that this action's going on. You need to warn that person, or it's on your conscience. And I think that is that not the case of the matter? Plus, I have another question.
Yeah, but the problem is the Torah says clear. There's an obligation to rebuke your fellow man. But what if you don't know how to do rebuke? We don't know how to do rebuke in this generation. There was a story. I'll give an example. There was a story of the Chaim. May his name be blessed. And in Yeshiva, he heard that there was a boy who smoked on Shabbos. And this boy was leaving the yeshiva. So he wanted to speak to the boy before he left. So he went to see this boy, and he grabbed his hand very tight, and he's crying, tears coming down. And the only thing he said two words, which was the exact same word. He said Shabbos. Shabbos, and he shook his hand and he walked away. Now that boy told the story many years later. Someone was telling the story in a synagogue, and someone piped up and said, "Yeah, I know the story to be true because it happened to me." It's like a wild thing, you tell the story, the person walks up and says, "Yeah, it was me," right? And the person said from that day on, from what the Chaim did, he never transgressed Shabbos again. Now, if we're on the level of the Chaim to be able to give rebuke like that, okay. But it's already been known in previous generations, we don't know how to do this. So even telling somebody, even a person is, a kiruv professional, someone who, does the professional outreach work or whatever, knows how to speak to people, this and that, doesn't mean it's going to be accepted, right? You're going to say something, you might turn them off more, right? Someone comes to your house, another example. Let's say a Jewish person comes, I don't know, fix your pipes, fix your washing machine, whatever. You're not religious, and he wants a cup of water. Am I allowed to give him a cup of water? Why? What's the problem? He's not going to make a blessing. Right? So it could be if I make the blessing, I say, listen, I'll give you a cup of water, you make the blessing. You get more offended. So there's a leniency. I can give him the cup of water even if he doesn't make a blessing. I don't have to try and convince him. Right? Because what could happen? If I tell him to make a blessing, he doesn't want to make a blessing, right? He's going to think we're crazy. He's going to hate Judaism more. Right? So, a person has to be careful, but we in general, we don't know how to do rebuke, right? If we don't know how to do rebuke, we don't say live and let live. We're saying what you're doing is wrong, right? There's no question. But I'm not going to be able to get that message over where you're going to be convinced and you think, especially let's say someone's about Tshuva, someone who came back to Judaism and say, oh, you're one to talk. You used to eat shrimp. You used to do this. Why should they listen? Right? Let's say they know that about someone's background. Say, oh, you're the one to talk, right? Holier than thou. Right? Very, very hard. I mean, especially by family. If they don't want to listen, that's one of the first things they'll use. Like, oh, you think you're so great, you think this, you think that, you're God's gift to the world. I remember this. Well, that's a Torah prohibition. That's a Torah prohibition if you remind someone of their past misdeeds. It's called onus devarim. That you're not allowed to do, right? Just by a ger, a convert, just, again, side point here. You say, oh, I remember you weren't Jewish. I remember you used to be Hare Krishna, with the flowers and whatever. Right? I remember you used to do this. That's forbidden. It doesn't matter if they don't do it in public. That's a different issue, right? That's embarrassing someone in public. Right? But even if they do it privately, they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to remind you what you used to do. Right? So we don't believe, i.e. Judaism doesn't believe in live and let live. This person's going to pay the price, right? They're for sure going to pay the price. Doesn't matter if they get it today, tomorrow, the next day. They're going to get it eventually. Even if they live to a ripe old age, they'll get it in the next world. God's got plenty of ways to deal with this, right? But at the end of the day, it's for my own good. I'm not sitting there, out there protesting, saying, oh, you scum of the earth, you loser, you this. Not about that. It's not a personal thing, right? It's about that you have to show the pain. You have to feel the pain. And if you don't feel the pain, there is something wrong with you. Something wrong with your soul, right? Just like someone once told me, they said, if you go to the beach, right? You go to a mixed beach, right? And if you get excited, there's something wrong with you. I said, yeah, according to all psychologists, if I don't, then there is definitely something wrong with me, right? Unless, God forbid, person of a different persuasion. That's the norm, right? Didn't God give one of the strongest desires in the person, right? I told you how to harness it, how to use it properly, not to squash it. Certainly not to squash it, right? But at the end of the day, it's a normal thing, right? So you're gonna say, wow, there's a time and a place, obviously. Right? You're not going to put yourself in that situation. A Jew shouldn't put themselves in such a situation. So yeah, it's about control. I get it. I'm not saying not. Right? But the point that we have to understand is there are things that should make us cringe. There are things that should make us really be disgusted. Right? When a person, if a person hears, someone ate pork, right? A Jew ate pork. It's gonna, it's not that, oh, pork is disgusting. People say it's very tasty. But what's the issue? The issue is my Creator in heaven says I can't eat it. And it's a forbidden thing. So how do I look at something like that, shrimp and pork and all these things? They may all taste good. No question. Right? The only thing is, I'm not allowed to eat it. Right? I have to look at it as a disgusting thing because my Creator said I can't eat it. Right, so so our souls are very much not in tune with who we need to be. And if somebody saw, that's the point here. I would digress a little bit, but that's the point: is that someone saw someone digress Shabbos, right? Sorry, not digress, transgress. The laws of Shabbos, and it doesn't affect them, right? Then that means their soul is dead in different ways. So that's why when these two witnesses come to the Sanhedrin, they do it first. They're the ones who inflict the punishment first. Why? Because they saw the desecration. And when someone sees the desecration, they have to be affected. Right? That was the whole thing when a person brought a sacrifice. Let's say they brought a sin offering. And the Kohen offers the sin offering. In other words, you bring that cow, whatever, to be sacrificed. That should have been you. The person's going to be more sensitive. Because the Vilna Gaon, Rav Elijah Vilna, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, said one of the things he wanted to see before he passed away was what a person looked before and after they gave a sacrifice. In other words, if the temple existed in Jerusalem Person brought the sacrifice. What did they look like before and after? Right? Because afterwards they cannot be the same unless a person's heart is hard as a rock. Because how can you see that animal slaughtered in front of you? You're able to get that atonement through that animal. And again, all the PETA activists will be jumping up and down. Say, oh, that animal didn't do anything to deserve it. You're right, but God said this is what you do. You take the animal and you sacrifice it. Right? So that being the case, you sacrificed this animal, but that should have been you. So the Vilna Gaon, how could a person not be affected by it? How can he not be changed by it? Unless the person's heart is hard as a rock, right? That's how he's not affected. But most people, if that would have been you, that would have been it. You would have been affected. You would have been affected in such a way. I remember when I was in Chile a number of years ago, I went to help somebody with the ritual slaughter, and at the very beginning, or whatever, in the middle, let's say, I said, okay, let's see what happens from beginning to end of the process. If the animal is killed and whatever, we won't go into gruesome details, right? So I saw from beginning to end of process, and tried to imagine, okay, this is my animal. This is the animal I brought. This is, I had to pay, fork over X amount of money, and this animal is going to die in place of me. So I tried to make it visual. Make it real. What would a person think? What would they think by actually going through it? So when you see it and you visualize it, oh, sacrifice is this, sacrifice is that, we don't have any connection to it, all this, that's true. We don't have a connection to it today. But imagine that's what you were supposed to do. This is the sacrifice you're supposed to bring. So says the Vilna Gaon, how could it be you'll be any different? It's impossible, in theory, right? A person cannot compartmentalize that much. When you see that animal flailing away and dies, and the blood comes out and they chop off the head and all this, right? Again, we won't get too gruesome here, but in the end, that should have been you. So there's mercy here. The mercy is that animal takes your place, but it really should happen to you. So says the Vilna Gaon, you would never be the same. You would never be the same. You'll be 10 times more careful, right? Than have to go through this again. Yeah.
Okay, because you've brought this right around into this other question because I think we should all understand how horrific it is to act inappropriate, especially in Hashem's backyard. In that regard. But I mean, Cole's asked a question that goes in the opposite spectrum, which you've come around to, and he says, Rabbi, isn't it true that a court that handed down a death penalty more than once in 70 years was considered a bloody court?
Yes.
And like you just brought this right around, so I mean,
right. So that is true. In other words, the rabbis, bent over backwards to make sure, that people wouldn't get killed, even though they may deserve it, right? But there are all kinds of questions they would ask. That I think in the name of Rabbi Akiva, it says that had he been there, no one would have died. Nobody, right? In other words, to show mercy. But the question is why? Why show so much mercy? If a person's liable for a death penalty, okay, so let him die. Let him die. But they had mercy. They didn't want to kill people. They didn't want to make it so so horrific. So they're gonna tell me, okay, if that's the case, why is it they had the death penalty in the first place? If nobody got killed, right, there are 4 death penalties. Right, for corporal punishment. One is being pushed off 3-story building, like we mentioned, desecration of Shabbos, or being a homosexual, same punishment. Right. The next is sreifa, being burnt. Being burnt means they held open your mouth, and molten lead thrown down your mouth, which I guess is always bad because your insides will totally explode. Right, you'll get burnt, so you'll die that way. Then you have chenek and cherek, right? One is being choked to death, one being having your head chopped off. But Anyway, according to the Talmud, the most severe is being stoned, right? Being thrown off this 3-story building, etc. So you might say, well, throwing molten lead down may seem more severe. Okay, some things may seem a little bit more severe. Whatever the case is, that's the hierarchy. That's what that's what the Talmud tells us. Now, again, you could tell me, well, if they didn't kill once in 7 years or once in 70 years, it was considered a bloody court, right? So why do you have the punishments? So the punishments are telling you how severe it is, regardless whether people got killed or not.
Wow.
Right? The rabbis had to let people know that this was a very severe thing.
Right.
Now you might, well, I'll do it anyway. I'm just not going to get the death penalty. You're going to pay a price. You're going to pay a serious price even if you don't die. Right? You pay it in this world, you pay it in the next. Now, even though, so let's make clear, even though death penalty doesn't exist today, we don't have a temple today, but there are things that are similar to the death penalty. For example, when someone got stoned, right, desecrating Shabbos, being thrown off a 3-story building, what is the death? Impact, right? Impact, thrown down. No difference, God forbid, someone gets in a car accident. If someone, God forbid, got in a car accident and died, right? Throwing can happen. Many people die in car accidents, right? Why do they die? Impact. I mean, they could also die not necessarily from the impact, but it could be a fire. Right? I heard a story, almost a whole family. There was an accident, the car caught on fire, and they couldn't get out. They got burned to death. Right? So a fire could be second punishment. Right? Second of corporal punishments. Now, the Talmud tells us these things might not exist, in the way that it exists in the time of the temple, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all.
Right.
Now, since God's ways are hidden, we learn it out. We're in the book of Deuteronomy. Torah tells us, right? God's ways are hidden. And if God's ways are hidden, do we understand? No. Now, a person could say, in theory, well, someone died in an accident, it must be they're liable for the death penalty by stoning. Nobody can make such a claim, right? That could be the case, but nobody knows, right? And a person's going to give a kvetch and a sigh, and it's a tragic thing, right? No one wants to hear about anyone died in a car accident, God forbid, or any of these other, or fires or whatever. No one wants to hear that, right? But again, something like that is judgment. Nothing. You can say it was quote unquote an accident. No such thing, right? That's what the people of Amalek wanted to bring to the world, right? That's the whole story of Purim. It's how Haman gets killed, right? Mr. Haman himself, because he doesn't believe in supernatural, right? There's no supernatural according to him. What did he bring? He brought doubt to the world, doubt of anything happening for any reason. And that's why there's a mitzvah to blot it out. If we knew who Amalek was today, there'd be a mitzvah to kill him. We don't know who Amalek is today, right? Because Sancherib mixed up all the nations. But that being the case, some people say, the Germans during World War II, they were part of Amalek because of the sheer cruelty, right, of what they did. Be that as it may, they brought doubt to the world. Doubt in the sense that stuff happens. That not only are we not in control, there is no control. Right? Like this virus. Okay, how it got let out, what happened, okay, the whole discussion. But at the end of the day, God says, you know what? I'm still here. I'm knocking on the door. It's a wake-up call. Right? One little microbe shut down the world. Stock exchange, way down. People can't have, certain people, businesses out the window overnight. It's not just, stuff happens. I mean, could be, we'll see later in the bigger picture what this is or what it isn't or whatever. Right? But the point is that there's someone who runs the world. And if someone who of everything, there is no chance happening. That's exactly what Amalek brought to the world. That's why there's a mitzvah for Jews every year to blot his name out. Blotting his name out means you can't kill him because it's impossible. but you have to blot out that idea. You have to put that in the back of your mind, in the front of your mind. There is nothing that happens that doesn't happen for a reason. Now, sometimes, while I'm on this topic, because I think it's a pertinent topic for today, that for, sometimes we'll see tragic things, and the only way that it can be explained, right, that's what I'll call like a quarter of a consolation, is the fact of transmigration of soul, right? We spoke about that last week, right? This idea that a soul can come back to this world and can be put in a certain situation and go through certain things, not because of what the person did. There are plenty of things we get paid for in this world for what we did, but there are other things that make no sense, why certain things happen, and not because of our sins, but it's only because your soul now has to go through this. So when you look at it in that way, the reason I said it's a quarter of a consolation is because, at the end of the day, if God forbid someone had a special child and the child dies, right, over time, and it's just a horrific thing to see, right? Like in Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, he had a son that died of progeria, right? Progeria, a disease where have a kid in the body of an 80-year-old, like a 10-year-old in the body of an 80-year-old. It's a horrific thing, right? But he made the wrong conclusion. His conclusion was that he made everyone feel good because you don't have to take responsibility for your actions. Because what he said was, I checked into my actions. I'm a pretty good guy. My wife also. So it must be God doesn't run the world. Now, no one should ever go through such a thing. That's absolute heresy. And obviously, he didn't understand or read the end of the book of Job, right? Where God chastises Job, for all kinds of things, right? So when we see certain things, what we see go on, it's interesting, because everything comes back to this stupid virus, right? But you have all kinds of things that are closed that are totally antithetical to Torah, right? Sports in different ways, antithetical to Torah, all, whatever. Going to these stadiums, you hear what people say and how they're dressed and all these things. Movies, Hollywood shut down. Okay, they'll come back eventually. But all these terrible things, all these terrible things that go against God, go against Torah, shut down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like finished. Okay, they may start up later, these sporting thing, whatever, when this thing all blows over, but this is an unbelievable thing. It's an unbelievable thing because you have to see the measure for measure here, right? These things go against what God wants. You don't want, okay, you got 40,000 people in the stadium, yelling and screaming, whatever. I don't think you're going to get the greatest, you're going to get closer to God. Some people will differ with me, but you're not going to get closer to God by seeing what these people say and what they do. Forget about the way they're dressed and if it's in the summer and all this. So the fact that all these things, okay, synagogues also, a lot of them got shut down, okay. But all these things that go against what God wants, shut down.
I know.
That's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible, and it's probably driving people bananas because there's nothing else to do. How many times can you watch the news over? Okay, how many more people died? How many more people infected? Let's get to the bottom. Joe and CDC, what do you have to say? I mean, it's driving people nuts. Like I've seen posts, people say, is there anything else to talk about? But it's an amazing thing that, I think one of the tests over here and, is the fact not only that God runs the world, but look at all the advancement. Look at all the advancement, in science and in technology and in medicine. And you got one stinking microbe that got let out or whatever happened, and it shut down the world. Now people say, we can handle it. We're on top of it. We're going to have a vaccine. We're going to do all these things. But they're missing the point. And the whole point is that God's in charge. And that all your medicine doing diddly squawk, however many people are going to die and all these people are infected. Look how contagious it is and all these things. You can't, okay, put everyone in lockdown. You're going to be close to martial law soon. Can't do much more, all right? They're not running buses for 3 days. They're not doing this. You can't do this. Can't, whatever. Right? You're not going to get that far on, but God's saying, I'm here. All your medicine fine. You're gonna get there eventually, and it's gonna stop whatever the number's gonna look like in the end, right? But you have to remember, with all your scientific advancement and this and that, look what he's done. Airlines shut down, businesses shut down, stock market crashing, right?
Yeah.
All these things, and no one knows when it's going to end. People claim, people say this, that, whatever, right?
Rabbi,
One second. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just saying, even if it does, I'm told that it can dissipate if people just self quarantine for 3 weeks and then wait another 3 weeks. They get it isolated to pockets. It can be coped with. But then again,
No,
what's next if they continue? If they continue going down the wrong path?
No, right. It's gonna be right. I understand, and it's only affecting one part of the population. It's mostly older people, right? But you can't, because even if you say it doesn't affect most people, it doesn't matter. These people are more susceptible. If they're more susceptible, then you have to do what you need to do, right? That's all true. But I'm just pointing out, with all the scientific, advance and all the medical advance, this one stinking thing has put everybody on their head, right? Physically and spiritually, because now you got to say, what does God want from me? It's not just shut down the world, shut down synagogues. Because you don't want this thing to spread. Okay, not again, depends where. Not all synagogues, whatever, but it's also something. You guys say, well, it's just a precaution. What can I learn from that? It could be, a person's in synagogue not doing what they need to do while they're there. And they speak about, regular subjects in a holy place. Sports don't belong in a synagogue. Politics don't belong in a synagogue. Proper decorum, right? That there's a reason the Sephardic people, many hold, were not hit by the Holocaust, and that's because they showed unbelievable respect in the synagogue. Right? One possible reason. Right? I don't want to digress. I just want to, I want to make the point that if we're getting hit also, right, the Jewish people are getting hit, you say, okay, it's all precautions. So synagogue schools, they all have to shut down. Right? Doesn't mean you stop learning. Doesn't mean you stop praying. But there is, you can't say it's just a natural thing. That, okay, so these shut down, these other things shut down. Okay, so synagogues will shut down also. Right? So, there is something else going on. But, I think, I would hope, but I don't have too much hope, but, I would hope in the medical community, they would say, wow, this is so beyond. This is something like, out of nowhere, like to eat a little bit of humble pie, but what do they do to get stronger? They say, we're in charge, we're going to take care of it, right? Just like the Talmud says, Rov sheberoifim l'gehenim. The majority of doctors, even if they're good, go to hell. Why do they go to hell? Because they see miracles on a regular basis, right? I think someone, delivers babies, and they see miracles left and right, and they say this is all nature. God forbid, they're all a bunch of heretics, most of them. Right? They're gonna say, oh, we're in charge, and we can do this, and we're on top of it, and don't worry, but you have to take these precautions. Yeah, they want to show it's natural. They want to show, like, in a natural world, this is how we're going to handle it, this is what we're going to do. But there's so many X factors. But no one's coming out and saying, boy, am I eating humble pie? Is the medical establishment eating humble pie? Hell no. Because they're going to get stronger and say, now we got it under control. We're working as quickly as we can. Whatever. The irony of all ironies, if God forbid, this plays out in a bad way, there aren't enough hospital beds to put people in a quarantine. In a lot of places. If God forbid it gets worse, it will get 10 times worse. There's no way to handle it. As good as some healthcare systems are. So, again, not to go, so much, into this, because I'm sure people are sick of it. But you have to see the bigger picture, right? In the bigger picture, God's saying one thing over here, and that is, you can't rely on anybody except for me, and you got to do what you need to do, and you have to serve me. It doesn't matter what's around you, right? Because everything I'm in charge of, and if I want to, just like the SARS thing, I can just take it away, right? I can just take it away. So we're saying extra psalms in the morning. Saying extra prayers, this, that, nobody wants it. Everyone wants it to go away, but It's only going to go away when God says, okay, now I think they got the point. But what's going to happen afterward? What's going to happen afterward? Let's say God takes it away. You go back, quote unquote, normal. There's the end of the NBA, starting baseball, everything, spring training. Finish spring training, start baseball. You got football in the summer, starting up, tremendous, not the CFL, regular football, right? Starting up, had to get that in, right? So everything goes back to normal. Hollywood goes back to normal. Gas prices, okay, go back up and this and that. Things get back to normal. But that's exactly what you should not hear or say after 9/11, right? Mayor Giuliani of New York City said, we want everyone to go back to normal. That's the opposite of the message that should have been given. You see something like that, there is no normalcy after that. You get just knocked upside the head, 2 planes into 2 major towers that you couldn't stop, right? 3,000 more people killed, and all the after effect, and all change the world that we live in. How can you go back to being normal? How can you say life is normal? Right? The Rambam states clear, when any of these things happen, if you say it's normal, you are cruel, not to mention a heretic. It says in the laws of fasting. And when something goes, something happens like this, you put on sackcloth and you're praying. That's what we have. We have sacrifices to give, other things. That's our weapon, right? It's prayer. Our weapon is Torah, right? Is learning. That's the antidote over here, right? But you person can't miss the point, and say, okay, we're gonna, we're gonna be quarantined. We're gonna be this, everyone's in lockdown. We're gonna beat this thing. Okay, you gotta take precautions. Nobody says you don't take precautions, right? But you have to understand where it's coming from. And you can't go back to normal. You can't live life in a normal way. Because if God brings this about and takes it away, and if God does miracles and then they stop, and you go back to living a normal life, there's going to be payback 10 times over. It's going to be 10 times worse. Right? So the message is we better get it. We better get the message, not go back and think we're living a normal life. And that life goes back to normal when they have it under control. Normal life is about being, life is very fragile. How many older people, have I heard say that? You never know what's going to be day to day. You're right. But obviously you don't live your life that way. Fame! I'm going to live forever. Come on. Everyone still thinks they're going to live forever. Okay, sports will come back. This will come back. Right? It's going to pass eventually. Right? It's not going to be forever over here. But they're going to miss the message. They're only complaining now. My kids are out of school. College is stopped. Am I going to get money back? Or this? All these things, okay. Right? It's caused havoc. But the bottom line is, did I get the message? Did the message, did the message penetrate? Now, I'm not saying anything that no one else doesn't know, right? This is all ABCs over here, right? Everyone knows a person can wake up tomorrow, God forbid, get hit by a bus, could have some disease, this, that, anything could happen. Nobody knows, right? We'll see in Pirkei Avos that, it says later that a person has to do tshuva every day of his life, has to repent, because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You have not, did anyone think this was going to happen months ago? Hell no. Unless you were a prophet. No one had any idea, unless the ones who let it out did. Whatever. But let's say for argument's sake, nobody knows. We have no idea. And now we have to react to it. The question is, are we reacting in the right way? Right? So we can't take a look at this, and that's really been the main theme tonight. Right, or this afternoon, morning, wherever you are, right? The main theme is we are not in control, right? And as much as they want to do, and as much lockdown, and as much distancing yourself from other people, and all these other things, that's good, right? That hopefully is going to slow things down and whatever, tremendous. But realize you're not in control. God's the one who's in control. He's in absolute control. There's a story I think I said before about the doctor, right? The doctor thinks he's in control, and he realizes he can't even control his own bowel movement, right? He ate a little bit of humble pie, a tremendous amount of humble pie he ate over here, right? So that's the idea, we think we can do this and we can do that, and we've sent someone to the moon, right? Even though some people think it was a
It
fake
was
or
a
whatever,
hoax.
but we sent people to the moon. We did this. We got all these, all these advances, technology in medicine. It's a different world. There's no question. But you know what? We're not in control. And when you're not in control, that makes people feel uncomfortable because they say, "What? I have to have, quote unquote, faith like the Christians?" No, we're not talking about the Christians here. We're talking faith by knowledge. And that means that, yeah, God is nature. God's in charge of nature. He's in charge of everything else. And by being in charge of everything else, it means there's no such thing as chance. This thing came out at this time. I saw a medrash last week. Someone showed me that right before the Messiah comes, there's going to be a plague. Now, it uses the plague of pestilence. Some say it's a sickness. Some say it's pestilence. Some say it's other things. Whatever. Does this mean it's the beginning and the end? The Messiah is coming? Don't know. Right? Who knows? Do I think it's a bubonic plague? I don't think it's a bubonic plague. It's a virus. It's a virus. It's going to take its toll. Do I think hundreds of millions of people are going to die? I find it hard to believe. Someone told me otherwise today. But, whatever it's going to be, the question is that what we see going on, we cannot be the same people afterwards. Because if we become the same people afterwards, that means we didn't get the message. And if you don't get the message, when God wants you to get the message, right? What does God do? Let's just flush this out. What does God do? If He wants you to return, He wants you to do tshuva, He'll do something, nearby, something in the world, get you to wake up. Right? That doesn't work. Maybe it'll hit close to the home. If that doesn't work, He's going to hit your pocket. If that doesn't work, and you don't realize that these things are happening because you have to change, then He's going to afflict your body. Then maybe you'll get the message. But you're going to say, why does God have to do that? Why does He do it step by step? And the reason is because He has mercy. He doesn't want to just whack us around and take us here and take us there and all these other things. He has mercy, right? But if you don't get the message, even if you realize this is a miracle and that's a miracle and all these things tremendous, but you didn't get the message, you didn't change. Like during the war here a few years ago, all these miracles of all these missiles, right? All these missiles coming in, a lot of them hitting open areas. Now you have to understand, these missiles that Hamas use, they're extremely accurate, and they're only like 5 kilometers from some of these, from some of these cities right nearby. Now some of them are hitting dead on, and miraculously people aren't dying, right? But a lot of them are hitting open fields, in open areas. Now you can tell me either they got the stupidest people shooting them, that could be, that could be one theory, or the fact there's something else going on. So my Rebbe said, anyone who says it's a miracle, even if you're an ultra-Orthodox Jew, you better change from that. That better make an impression. That better get you to change, to move. Because if it doesn't, why am I making miracles for? Look at all the miracles God did in Egypt. 80% did not get out, according to most commentaries. 8 million people died in the plague of darkness, right, over time. But they finished dying in the plague of darkness. Right? According to some, that's 8 million people. 8 million people in Egypt saw the miracles. They want to go. They don't want to get out. It's mind-boggling. They didn't get the message. Right? The miracles, part of the message of the miracles that were done, were not just done for Pharaoh and to destroy Egypt. That's part of it. Right? But a lot of the plagues were given for one reason, to get the Jewish people to see God's power and to internalize the message. And when you internalize the message, it's a whole different ball game. You live your life on a different plane. Right? So today everyone's complaining, there's nothing to do. Can't go anywhere, can't do anything. But you can look at it in a more global way, in the sense of vis-a-vis my connection to God and what it does to me and how it affects me, right? Because again, going back to normalcy is exactly what God doesn't want. Right? We're going to pick on, former Mayor Giuliani. We're not going back to what the norm is. Because if you do that, then God says, I wasted my time. Why in the world did I do this if you didn't get the message?
Right. I think there needs to be a little more fear of heaven in respect of what's really going on, and yeah.
So let's finish up this Mishnah. So at the end of the Mishnah, it says, "Be cautious with your words, lest they learn to lie." Now, what does it mean here? So it means, one explanation is that the judge, you can't have a judge lead the witnesses, right? Or lead the one who's making the claim or defending the claim. Why? Because what could the judge say? Well, are you sure it happened like this? Maybe it happened like this. Or maybe that happened. In other words, you're giving them ideas. You're giving them possibilities. Now, it doesn't mean, it changes their story per se. But it could be, that through these words, judges are going to be able to ascertain what really happened. But you got to be careful, right? Why? You got to be careful so they don't help the witnesses reveal something where they're going to lie. In other words, if you lead the witness, so to speak, and you tell them, well, are you sure it happened like this? Are you sure it happened like that? And then they can just fantasize and make up their own thing. So what are you doing? You're leading the witness to a certain extent, and they could lie. They could change their story. You got to say, it's not my problem. I'm not telling them to lie. But what are you doing? You are giving them, you're giving them the fodder. You're giving them the fodder to lie. You're putting that in their minds. Well, if you put it in their minds, you're responsible. They may bend the truth. They may lie. They may, do other things that they shouldn't have done or they would not have done, right, unless this happened. In other words, they'll say what they say. They'll contradict the other person. They'll say, no, it's not what you meant. It's not what you signed on. It's not this. It's not that. Whatever. They'll have to get to the truth, right? They're for sure going to have to get to the truth about why these things, what he said, and, did he really say it? Did he sign on it? What did he mean? All these different things. But if you're causing someone, we saw last week, if you cause someone even to swear, and you're causing them to swear because you only have one witness, right? You need two witnesses. Torah tells me to establish something, but I only have one witness. So what do? You have to get the other guy to swear. But we don't get people to swear today. Why not? Because we're afraid he's going to lie. Not going to have fear of heaven, so he'll lie. Okay. So why is that my fault? Why am I held responsible? Because, we have a technical issue here. The technical issue is this guy can't swear. Right? We're sorry, you're causing him to swear. I have no choice. Right? What we spoke about last week. I have no choice. What could I do? This guy has to swear because I only have one witness. But you're causing him to swear. Right? It's a circular argument. But I can't get anything from him unless he swears. So there's a technical issue, but still, the way it's looked at, in a moral way, is that you're causing him to do something that he shouldn't do. Right? It's like my Rebbe says, for instance, a person, two Jews come to rabbinical court, and let's say one brings him to rabbinical court, he doesn't show up. Doesn't show up the first time, send him a second invitation, doesn't show up, third time doesn't show up. So what do? They have the person come in front of the rabbinical court, and he'll tell over what his argument is. Then the rabbinical court thinks he's got a good argument, they'll send him to secular court. You're only allowed to go to secular court when you have permission from the rabbinical court. You can't just go to secular court, even if you know this other Jew's not going to go. It's Torah prohibition. It's a pretty severe thing. Right, but my Rebbe asked the question, if that's true, and he's going to the rabbinical court, he's going to a secular court, we don't want to go to secular court. We don't want to use secular law. So why is that a benefit? Why should I be allowed to do it? Maybe it's going to skew Torah law. Maybe. Then you're going to say, I don't have a choice. This guy, this person, whoever it is, caused me damage. So if everyone did that, no one showed up to a rabbinical court, and you couldn't go to a secular court, what's going to be? You're stuck. Right? The rabbinical court doesn't have power today, so everyone's going to do it. Everyone will call, if they cause other people damage, they won't show up, and that's it. They won't be liable. Because they don't have power. So what do you tell them? Okay. Right? You have a good case? Great. Here's permission. Go to secular court. Only problem is you don't want to go to secular court. The perversion of justice, possibly. So why do you want to rely on them if you're not allowed to go there in the first place? Circular argument. It's good. Circular argument back and forth. Right? So why not? Because you have no choice. You still have to feel bad about going to secular court, but you have no choice. People don't have a sensitivity today. Right? If this is the case, this is what I'm going to do. And that's it. They don't, why don't they feel bad about it? They don't feel bad about it because, okay, it's what I have to do. He's not going to pay me. He owes me money. He's not showing up to rabbinical court. Okay, I have to go to secular court. Right? But what do most people say? They'll say, they'll say, okay, I got to take him to court and that's it. I don't feel bad about it. Right? They don't give like a little bit of a kvetch and say, oh, what a terrible thing. Not necessarily saying that. Maybe some people will. Right? But, at the end of the day, you got to feel bad you're doing this because it's not what the Torah wants. Right? But at the end of the day, do I have a choice? No. I don't have a choice. So wherever there points out, okay, you have permissibility to go. Right? If the rabbinical court gives you permissibility, good. Right? And then you take care of it there. Because, they have real power. They have real power today. Fine. I shouldn't feel good about it. Right? That's the difference. And I think this ties everything together.
It does, definitely.
Because I think there's a very big lack of sensitivity, sensitivity in the world. Right? Certainly how we deal with others. I mean, it is interesting. People are going to refrain from giving hugs, giving handshakes and, and high fives and, and different things, whatever. But now you have to have it's funny. I went to pray last night in this yeshiva where I pray every Shabbos, and they have like 150 guys there, right? So what do? You can only have 30. You can only have 30 in one place. I had they whatever, different rooms, different places. But in one room in the main sanctuary, they're only allowed 30 people, right? So they had 3 rows of 10, right, going back. But you had to be like a certain distance, right? Certain distance away on the side and the back or whatever. So the head of the yeshiva is like busy like pushing people this way, like directing traffic. It was not to mention the fact all the windows are open and it's cold and it's rainy here. It's like unbelievable. It's like, I'm just trying to get warm. But the thing is, so there's a distance, right? On buses they stop people from sitting like in the first 2 rows, not to be close to the driver, right? So you don't breathe out on, God forbid, or whatever, right? So they want to have like some sort of distance, right? So there's also a message in that, people are very superficial. I'm not saying everybody, but there are a lot of people that are very superficial and they want to know everything about everything, and there has to be a distance. You're not just gonna, harp on someone or this or that or whatever. You gotta give some level of distance. And that could be, one of the messages. You're not on top of each other. It doesn't matter. You're next to each other. You have a little bit of distance, but it's like overcrowding the space. In a certain way. So a person has to have their own space. They should have enough space where someone's not on top of them. Now again, if small areas, okay. Right, but I'm just saying in spiritual terms, not necessarily in physical terms. Great rabbis tell us that we need our own space, but the worst thing in the world is for a person to be by himself. When you're by yourself, you gotta get on my phone. Gotta be on the computer. I got like free time. Like, what should I do? I'm gonna kill time. They're afraid to be alone with themselves. Because when they look at themselves, if they have to look at themselves in the mirror, say, hey, where'd that gray hair come from? Where'd this come from? They say, no, they're looking in the mirror to see who they are. And if they see who they are for a few minutes, They don't want to see anymore. They don't want to be alone with themselves, because then the thoughts go crazy. And God forbid you should think about anything serious. There was a statistic years ago that said 1% think, 3% think they think, 95% rather die than think. Right? People don't want to think. It's heavy. You take something like what's going on today. Yeah, there could be a lot of people that could die. There's no question. And look at how it affected the stock market and businesses and and all kinds of things, right? So life is heavy. Life is heavy in general, right? We don't need any we don't need any extras, right? Life is plenty heavy. That being the case, got to take stock. Got to take stock. Got to live life to the fullest every day, and we can't be lazy. This is unfortunately it's a good wake up call, because it's good we get this jolt, because people see even if they know this, and and everyone should admit it, and everyone should be nodding saying, yeah, life is flimsy. Nobody knows day in and day out what's going to be. But is that the way you live your life? You don't want me to sing Fame again. Their lives. Right? And they think that, okay, this is going to pass, eventually get back to normal. Take the precautions. It doesn't affect most people. And even if someone gets it, it's a strain of the flu. It's a pain in the neck. And, a person's relatively healthy without any other issues. It's not going to affect you that way. If you're older, yeah, I wouldn't go out. Person, got other compromising issues, over 70, I wouldn't go out of my door. You don't take precaution. You don't put your life in danger. Okay, since the thing is so contagious, so they don't want everyone running around. Fine, right? That I understand. But if God forbid somebody gets it, in general, not going to say there are cases of people in respirators and different things. Okay, younger people. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, right? But at the end of the day, what's going to be? You'll get the flu. It's a pain to get the flu. You don't feel good, right? You have a fever. Your head's pounding. You can't eat. You might throw up. Different things. But you're going to get over the flu, right? Most people are going to get over it. It's annoying, right? Nobody likes to be sick, right? Especially doctors, right? Nobody likes to be sick, right? But this is exactly the opposite of what the Torah tells us. Torah tells us the only thing you're allowed to be afraid of is, God forbid, I forget my Torah. I'm supposed to be afraid of God and think of how awesome He is and all that. That's all true. What's the deal with toilet paper? Everyone and their mother. But it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. That's not what God wants. He does not want people to panic. And this thing, again, I'm not a doctor. I didn't play him on TV. You can take what I say with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's a flu. It might be a strong flu, right? In certain places, 20% who get it, if they're compromised, will die. That's pretty strong. I don't think there's any question, but I certainly don't believe it. I could be 100% wrong. I don't believe hundreds of millions are going to die from this. It's a flu. That's what it is. But you got to take precautions. And you got to remember one major thing. If a person really believes in God, and we could go through the book Duties of the Heart of Shar B'Tachon about proper faith in God. Everything happens for a reason. There's nothing happens for no reason. And the mantra is, okay, this is what God wants. This is what I have to do. This is how my life has to change, temporarily. And this is where it all comes from, right? It's not about panic, because God's there the whole time, right? Just like in the book of Esther, God's name's not mentioned, but He's there. All the things show that God's running the show. If you read the book, you know how to read it, right? God is running the show, right? But at the end of the day, that's what we have to think, right? It's not about panic. I mean, see people fighting over toilet paper. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I heard a story. People buying all these sanitizing things, and they sold it for 3 times the price, made a profit, only in America. It's insane. People are dying, and that's what you're doing? You're hawking on eBay for 3 times the price? Come on. Guy can make millions. It's crazy.
Yeah, Rabbi, we had people here. We had one couple clear out a grocery store of its entire meat in a town of about 15,000 people, and they literally, one grocery store went in, bought everything in the meat. Like the two of them walked out, slapped it on their credit card with a few overpacked carts a piece, and walked out. Like, do they have the freezers for that? That hoarding stuff is just, it's a chronic sign of the shameful state of some people. But then to even try and flip it for double the greed.
No, but the Torah philosophy is God's the one running the show, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, even God forbid people are dying, right? But the idea is we don't live in panic. And anyone who lives in panic means you're chaser and emunah. You are lacking proper faith in God, according to everybody. Right now, does that mean we don't take precautions? You take precautions. Buying 5 things of toilet paper? Okay, so you'd be good for another number of months. Okay. That's not what God wants. You do your normal hishtadlus, you put your best foot forward. That's what God wants. Panic? It's forbidden. Panic 100% according to the Torah is forbidden. So now, someone will ask, well, that's only by Jews. What about non-Jews? Can non-Jews panic? They have an obligation to believe in God. They have an obligation. They don't have necessarily an obligation to believe that God runs the world, right? That there's divine providence, right? That's more or less a bonus. I think they should have an obligation to believe in that, but they don't have to, right? But at the end of the day, if they understand God is absolute, He runs the show, and He takes care of everything, then panicking is forbidden. Doesn't mean I don't have to pray hard, I don't have to work hard, I don't have to put my best foot forward, right? Panic is forbidden. And that's what it's gotten to. The people think all these things are going to shut down, right? You're not going to be able to go to the supermarket. You're not going to go anywhere. So, okay. So at least I have toilet paper. I mean, I have a few cans of tuna, extra pasta, extra this. But okay, you take your normal precautions, fine. But if you don't see the bigger picture, you miss the whole thing, right? And that's what we don't want to do. Because if it comes to that, and things go back to normal, and everyone's like, oh, thank God, baseball's back. Thank God we finished the NBA. Thank God, what do you call it, training camp, for football. Tremendous. Hollywood's back, movies are coming out, everything's good. And then 100% you miss the boat. And we don't want to miss the boat. Nobody should miss the boat, because when it comes back, God forbid, God wants to make something else. He say, look what I did to humanity. Look what I did. I sent this one little micro, and I turned everything on its head. Some people woke up. That was good. But the vast majority totally missed the boat. So God, what's God going to do? Right? So we have precedent. And the precedent is, when they don't get the message, Jewish people in general, or specifically in the world in general, then God tightens the screws. God makes it work. And that's not what we want. We want to be able to do things and do the right thing without being thrown these different things. But you tell me if I don't have any trials and tribulations, I don't grow. Right? That's true. We're not asking for it. So we should live our lives on a regular basis without these trials and tribulations, thinking that any day, anything can happen, and I'm at the mercy of God. And just because everything's good today does not mean it's going to be good tomorrow. Doesn't mean it's not going to be good the next day. You can have all these things going good, for a while, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, it comes. Hotels are racked. I mean, people go away for Passover. No one's going, right? People are not going to go. It's going to destroy businesses overnight, right? A person has to take stock of their lives. And, more important, I think, is how they deal with others. Because, if there's a social distance that we have to be, because, you don't want to catch it. You don't want to catch it from anyone else. Therefore, you're going to be, a certain distance away. But what about our, how we deal with others socially? I mean, that goes hand in hand. It's not, it's ironic in a certain way. That, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be distant, in the sense so, because this thing is so contagious. Okay, so if there's social distancing, then there's something wrong socially. that people are too close, on top of each other, how they deal with each other. Nothing goes in this world that's not measure for measure, right? You don't even have to think that hard, into some of these what the people call draconian, measures, of what's going on, because they don't know what else to do. Because they say there's too much interaction, all these things going on, this thing's going to spread like wildfire, and a lot more people will die, right? That's probably true, right? That is probably true. But there's nothing that happened, as the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, there's nothing that happens spiritually, doesn't have ramifications physically. There's no such thing as something, a person does something physical doesn't affect spiritual. It goes both ways. Right? It definitely goes both ways. And how it works, and it goes upstairs and God judges and throws it back down in this world, and how it's evaluated and what the repercussions are, all these different things. We don't have the eyes to see. We don't see things in black and white, etc. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole spiritual world out there, but what we're looking at, we have no idea. We have no idea. And when everybody says it's a natural thing and it's going to pass and we got to be careful and everyone's in lockdown and, be martial law and different things, we're going to beat this. They missed the point. It's not your hands. Because if God wants, why did these other viruses disappear? Because they disappeared. They disappeared. Okay, we had cures for it, this, that. They disappeared. If God wanted to, people were saying it's going to be around for 6 months. It's be around for another 6 months. You imagine living like this for 6 months, people are gonna go crazy. Forget not going out or whatever. Business is gonna be shut. And you can't shut down everything, right? But the reality is, do we get the message? That's the idea behind it, and you have to be able to see, you have to be able to see what the measure for measure is. I mean, obviously, the whole world is in lockdown. That is not good. I mean, forget about financially and other things. Think about in the bigger scheme of things. We have free will, right? We can do what we want. We can come and we can go. We put our best foot forward. But when God says, you know what? I'm going to teach you guys a lesson. I'm going to send this thing out and I'm going to shut down the world. That's an awesome thing. You think about it. It all over. All over. The question, the question is, did we get the message? Or not, and hopefully, this will change certain things about ourselves. Certainly, how sanitized we will now be, and how careful, different things, that we may be. But it's not just about that, right? It's about the spiritual aspect. It's about how we deal with others. And how we deal with ourselves. Because if you're in quarantine, essentially we're all in quarantine, right? Some more, some less. Whatever
really
it is.
To light a lot of human nature, and Rabbi Goldberg shared last Sunday just about refocusing, taking this time to refocus, and
right.
I think in line with what you're saying, if people just realize, hey, get the message.
Right, but the thing is that if you get people by themselves, we mentioned before, if you're by yourself and you have to see who you are, it may not be so pleasant. But even if it's not pleasant, kick yourself in the behind, and start changing small things, right? Small. That's what Musar is. That's all what Musar is, right? Of ethics, it's changing something small, right? And you work on something small. You don't bite off more than you can chew, And when you do that, you have a sensitivity. When you have a sensitivity, you look at the world in a totally different way. Right, and like desecration of Shabbos. Someone sees someone desecrate Shabbos, you wish them a good Shabbos. You go to synagogue, all things being equal, but it doesn't affect you. You should be cringing. It should bother you that these people don't know anything, that they desecrate it. If it doesn't, it means there's something wrong with your soul. So essentially, there's something wrong with all of us, no question. Some more, some less, whatever it is. But if a person's alone with themselves, right, that's the hardest thing, because then you have to see who you are. And what we are, what makes up of us, right? And it may be not an easy thing to see, but you got to start somewhere, right? People will say, well, if you're at the bottom, the only place you can go is up. Well, that may be true, but you can also get knocked down. Right? It's very easy to get knocked down, but at the end of the day, you have to want to change. if you get in a wake up call and nothing happens, then it's a waste, right? That I guess is that I guess is the message, and that's the mantra we have to take home with us.
Wow. Well, Rabbi, you really touched on plenty today, and I just so appreciate you sharing us the core of the court system and the heart of what is genuine, just behavior and ethics when dealing with certain things, and then even bring it around to how even this virus. Get the point, folks. There could be things going on in our lives in the world that we should ourselves be adjusting, especially in relation to social interactions and who we are and who we bring to that social interaction. And our free will, it does exist, but we can only change ourselves. And we need to realize that, hey, if I adjust this and adjust that because it needs to be adjusted, and you take that back out in the world after all this dust settles, we can begin to make the world a better place. And I think this is what the ethics of the fathers really gets across. I think a lot more than many, many, many messages, but there's the core of what ethics are. And it begins with you being a moral person and sharing that. And I just don't think we could ever do this without the light of Torah shining to the nations. And I'm so overjoyed that Rabbi Coffman out of Israel is taking that time, even during his quarantine. I know he's got such a busy schedule tomorrow.
I'm
Rabbi,
not quarantined. We're still good. I'm just saying in general, can't go here, can't go there. So it's almost
right. Yeah.
It's just uncanny. Like there were signs up in a bunch of playgrounds saying that kids cannot come here. Until further notice. That's okay. Like I'm sure people going out of their minds. You can't have babysitters. You can have babysitter groups and all kinds of things. Everyone has to deal with what they have to deal with. And so everyone's in this lockdown mode. Just a question of how much.
Yeah. So all I can continue to advise people out there is to stay safe. Don't let this spread any further by being practice that social distancing, but also learn from Torah in the sense that it's okay to be alone if you're doing some introspection and reflection and prayer, and if you need to do teshuvah, do it and be real with yourself. And I am confident that better days are coming. And we all praying for Mashiach and that light continues to shine. I just love to hear these ethics come out of Israel, to hear it come out of Zion, if you will, per se. To keep this flame alive. I think we touched on some stuff today, Rabbi, that the laws of days gone by, even though there may not be a Sanhedrin as there once was, the signs that you touched on, the repercussions, they're still there. I like how you touched on today, heaven forbid there be an honest link between, what a punishment was way back then and an accident today, or somebody caught in a fire. I mean, nobody wants to think of bad things, but then why do people do things they should not be doing? I think you captured at the beginning of today's class what the nugget of holiness is if you will just honor that and respect that and cherish that and love Hashem. I think there's so much there. Any closing words, Rabbi? I mean, we're nearing the 90-minute mark. Any closing words? Folks, you can always catch Rabbi Coffman on his website, orthodoxconversion.com. I invite you to look him up on social media. You can find him on Facebook or on his YouTube page. I know he shares with a lot of energy and in his unique way, but it's the genuine Torah as it's been handed down. And I love this class, Pirkei Avos. It's just, and I think we got into some beautiful stuff today. But Rabbi, have you got any final words? Because next week, I know you guys are on your time change, your daylight savings. We've already done it here in the West, so hopefully we'll be able to discuss a time. But if it doesn't work, every moment that you share with us is just we're thankful and grateful. So, any closing words?
Yeah, one last thing. As non-Jews, you got to know what the Torah says, and you have to. You have to live it. You definitely have to live it, and learn by the people that know. that know how to give this over. But at the end of the day, we all have to do what God wants us to do. Whether it's being Jewish or not being Jewish, etc. But the thing we can take out, from all of this is the fact that anybody a non-Jew, they have to see, God's in charge, right? And there's no such thing as accidents, and have that proper Jewish philosophy, which puts us in the right direction, because so we don't want people to panic, right? It is a hairy thing, it is scary, different things, true, but at the end of the day, panic comes because people don't have proper faith, right? And they don't have proper belief, and unfortunately they don't know where to get it, in in different places where it could be that they shouldn't get it. A very good book to get. You go through some of these things is Derech Hashem, the way of God, by the Ramchal, by Moshe Chaim Utzato, Zecher Tzadik Livrocho. And it's a hard book to go through, even in English, go through it a few times just to get like the feel of it, right? But he speaks over there how God runs the world and how he takes care of things and how he uses spiritual forces to do what he wants. When you see the bigger picture, even when there are difficult times, at least you understand the bigger picture. And anyone out there, is busy hoarding or panicking or whatever, you have to understand it's a divine plan. However it's going to be, we have to be safe. We have to be cautious. We have to be careful, right? But at the end of the day, we know that he's the one in charge. And when we know he's the one in charge, okay, it could get worse. A lot of things could be bad, right? At the end of the day, but it's not haphazard. And we're not grasping for straws, not saying, oh, this means this, and it's Kabbalah, and it's this. These are basic ideas. And nothing is meted out that's not measure for measure. Now, a lot of times we may not fathom what the measure for measure is. Sometimes it's more obvious. Okay. But at the end of the day, person, if you're going to learn, you got to learn the right way. You got to take it step by step, and you have to get the knowledge where proper people have it. And unfortunately, as we know, there are a lot of quacks out there, a lot of people who think they represent Torah when they don't. You have to get from the right sources. And when you get from the right sources, you have the proper perspective. I can promise you, at the end of the day, it's a totally different world. You're looking at, because you can look, we're secular people. They look at you look at the world, and you see, you can look at it in two different ways. One person will see, oh, this happened by chance, this happened by whatever, and you see it's a totally different thing. Your mindset is totally, is totally different. But if a person has that different mindset, you're already ahead of 90% of the world, and it changes lives. It changes perspective. It changes the way, we look at things. Should I be hoarding and buying all this stuff? Okay, you take certain precautions, but if you don't have faith and you don't know what you're doing, so yeah, it's panic time because you don't know what's going to be. Nobody knows what's going to be, right? But it's forbidden to panic, right? You do what you can do, but the panic is not a Torah concept.
No.
God knows what he's doing. God has a lot of rachamim, right? He's got a lot of compassion. He's got judgment also, right? But again, the message is that we have to get the right message. We have to work on our relationships. We have to be better people. In order for the Messiah to come, that's what has to be, right? We have to strive. Could be, will be, and come in ways that are not so pleasant. Regardless of what it's going to be, we have to hold on for dear life. That's what, so I'll end by saying, when we return the Torah to the Ark twice a week and on Shabbos, we say, Eitz Chaim hi lemachzikim ba. We say the Torah is a tree of life to those that grasp it. The word lemachzikim ba is causative. Right? Notice Hebrew grammar, it's hefil, it's causative. Meaning that when I grab onto the Torah, what am I doing? Nothing. It's the effect the Torah is going to have on me. You can say, wow, These are great ideas. These are great things. Put it into practice. Because great ideas mean nothing if I don't put it into my heart, right? If I don't act on it, right? We don't, there's a lot of good things out there in Jewish philosophy, good, but Torah is all about action, whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, right? So I got to take the bull by the horn, and if these are, God forbid, I should say God forbid necessarily, if these are the last days, the Messiah is going to come, we got to be ready, right? We certainly have to be ready. Our mindset has to be ready. It may be, it may not. Who knows, right? Who knows what's going to be. But before a person goes to sleep, think about what I did during the day. Think about how I spoke. Think about my actions, right? Think about what I could have done, or I wasted time. I didn't waste time. This, that. Take stock, right? We're very good at taking stock when there's tragedy. Sometimes, right? We're very good when there's an upheaval. Say, fame, right? Life is precious. Every second is precious. It's all true. I don't need the world to be shut down to recognize God's in charge. Oh. I don't need social distancing to know I have to work on relationships. Mm-hmm. I don't need to know that we're in total lockdown to understand who's in charge. Right? I already know that. Right? God's saying, but you're not actualizing it. You're not living your life the way you need to. So okay, so I'm going to lock you up, and that's worse. And that's 10 times worse because you got to be alone. Forget with your family. If you have a family, forget being alone with your family is one thing. Be alone with yourself. See who you are. See what you represent. And the picture may not be pretty. And even if it's not pretty, even if you follow the CFL, doesn't matter. Right? Because there's still hope for you. Damn, there's still hope. But even in your heart of hearts, right? Even if your heart of hearts, you look in the mirror, you don't like what you see. It doesn't mean you beat yourself up. It doesn't mean you say, oh, woe to me, I can't change, I'm this, I'm that. There's never no hope, right? You got to start somewhere. You got to have building blocks. When you have the building blocks, again, I promise you, you take it step by step, you look into a different world. You have different glasses to be able to see, right? That's what we want to get. That's the message. Even if you fail, even if you make mistakes, even if the inclination throws you around and this and that, okay. You'll be like a bad box and knock down once, get up again, knock down again. You dust yourself off, right? But once the evil inclination has a hold of you, even if it makes a little bit of an imprint, and then it starts nudging and nudging, then the evil inclination walks away, saying, "Oh, got another one. Oh, got another one." Right? Can't let it in. You got to be, you got to be strong. And in these times, right? It's all about putting what I want to do into action. Don't think big, right? Think relatively small. Because when you think relatively small, you take small steps. When you take small steps, then you can work on other things. And everything a person does and what they learn are building blocks. When you have those building blocks, and as we mentioned before, you have that sensitivity. Sensitivity is worth everything. Because then you're looking at the world in a different way, and what I see and what I say, right, it's a totally different ballgame. That's the message.
Beautiful. Well said. I'm not going to add another word to that. So, folks, until next time, I want to thank Rabbi Coffman and all of you folks for joining us on YouTube and Facebook. And please share the message out there. Share it with your friends. I know that there's something in here today that we all need to hear, especially while we're going through this self-isolation, self-quarantine, practice social distancing. But stay safe out there, folks. So until next time, this is Dan and Rabbi Coffman signing out.